September 27th, 1944. Deep in German-occupied territory, Oberleutnant Heinrich Weber sat at his desk, scanning the list of American prisoners captured during the night's raid. His eyes froze on one name. Second Lieutenant Reeba Whittle, Army Nurse Corps. A woman, alone, captured, in a war zone where women were never meant to tread. Weber had served 20 years in the Wehrmacht. He had seen fear, desperation and death in countless forms, but never this. Never a woman in uniform, standing amid chaos, administering care to the wounded under fire. And yet here she was, alive, unbroken, and entirely unafraid. What Weber didn't know was that this nurse had already saved over 500 lives. She had flown aboard C-47 medical evacuation planes, treating American soldiers riddled with bullets, broken, bleeding, and barely clinging to life. She had even treated German wounded. Each mission carried the risk of flak, fighter attacks, and freezing unpressurized aircraft. She had faced death so often it had become routine, yet she persisted. Now captured, injured, and alone, she faced German officers who could not comprehend her courage or her defiance. She had survived a plane crash, tended to the wounded while herself bleeding and broken, and refused to be intimidated by interrogation. Weber stared. This was a challenge to everything he had believed about women, about American soldiers, and about the rules of war. Reeba Whittle was not just a nurse. She was proof that courage recognizes no uniform, no gender, no regulation. In that moment, the Germans realized they had underestimated her. The very assumptions they had about the limitations of their enemy were about to be shattered by one young American woman, alone, fearless, and unyielding. Before the crash, before the capture, Reeba Whittle was an unassuming 25-year-old with a singular determination to save lives no matter the cost. Born in 1919, she had grown up with a steady sense of duty and a calling toward nursing. When the United States entered World War II, Reeba saw the opportunity to serve her country. But she didn't want the quiet safety of a hospital far from the front lines. She wanted to be where the action was, where lives were in immediate danger, where her skills could make the difference between survival and death. Her path led her to the newly formed Army Air Corps Flight Nurse Program. Initially, the Army was reluctant to allow women on evacuation flights. Too dangerous, they said. Combat stress would be unbearable. The planes were unpressurized, bouncing through enemy fire, often with wounded soldiers writhing in pain around them. Women simply weren't meant for that. Reeba's response was unwavering. I'm a nurse. Wounded soldiers need treatment immediately. I don't care where that treatment happens. Her determination won over the officials. She was assigned to the elite unit of flight nurses, tasked with evacuating the most critically wounded from the front lines back to field hospitals. The missions were brutal. C-47 transport planes carried 30 or 40 injured soldiers, often critically wounded, across skies lined with German flak and fighters. The aircraft were cold, unpressurized, and constantly jostled by turbulence. Reeba worked tirelessly, stabilizing injuries, administering blood transfusions, and performing triage mid-flight. Every mission demanded precision, courage, and nerves of steel. She witnessed horrors no civilian nurse could imagine: broken bones, mangled limbs, shock, and the constant, imminent threat of death. Yet she persevered. Within months, she had treated over 500 wounded, including German prisoners who had been captured and were being transported back to Allied hospitals. Her reputation grew rapidly. Pilots trusted her judgment. Wounded soldiers knew her calm presence could mean the difference between life and death. But danger followed her relentlessly. Reeba became accustomed to the roar of flak exploding nearby, the shudder of planes hit by bullets, and the chilling knowledge that every flight could be her last. Yet she remained undeterred, driven by a principle few understood fully: medical care doesn't wait for safety. By September 1944, Reeba was flying daily missions over German-occupied France. She had already faced fire, storms, and death with unflinching composure, but fate was about to test her like never before. On the 27th, during what should have been a routine evacuation flight near Aachen, her C-47 would be struck, sending her and her crew crashing into enemy territory. The pilots would die instantly. The soldiers she was treating would be gravely wounded. And Reeba, though injured herself, would rise above the chaos, tending to the wounded under fire, defying every expectation placed upon her because of her gender, her role, and the impossibility of the situation. The stage was set. A young American nurse, the embodiment of courage and skill, was about to confront the full, unforgiving reality of being captured behind enemy lines. But even in the face of imprisonment, Reeba Whittle's resolve would not waver. She was about to become the only American military nurse held as a prisoner of war in Europe, and the Germans had no idea what they had just unleashed. The morning of September 2007, 1944, dawned over the skies of German-occupied Aachen. Reeba Whittle's C-47 transport plane carried its usual burden, dozens of critically wounded soldiers, their groans and cries filling the unpressurized cabin. Reeba moved swiftly between stretchers, her hands steady despite the shuddering of the aircraft, checking wounds, administering morphine, and offering words of calm. Outside, flak exploded in the sky, tearing holes in metal and sending the plane into sudden jolts. Every nerve in her body was alert, every decision could mean life or death. Then came the shot that would change everything. A shell tore through the fuselage, the aircraft shuddering violently. The pilots struggled to maintain control, but the damage was catastrophic. The C-47 nosedived, hitting the ground with a bone-rattling crash. Pilots were killed instantly. Soldiers around her screamed and moaned, trapped under twisted metal and debris. And Reeba, though injured, bruised, bleeding, and with broken ribs, did what she had always done. She acted. Amid the wreckage, Reeba triaged the wounded, moving first to those with the gravest injuries. Her own pain was secondary. Each life she touched, each bandage she wrapped, was a small victory against chaos. German soldiers soon arrived, weapons ready, expecting frightened survivors, perhaps even surrender. What they found instead was a young American woman uniform stained with blood, calmly tending to soldiers who might have been her enemies. Their disbelief was immediate. Oberleutnant Heinrich Weber arrived on the scene shortly after. A career officer, Weber had never encountered a woman in such circumstances. His training told him nurses stayed behind the lines. His orders said women should not be here, and yet before him was undeniable proof to the contrary. Whittle, ignoring her own injuries, explained simply, wounded men needed immediate care. Would he prefer they die during transport? Weber had no answer. The logic was unassailable. For days the Germans debated what to do with her. She was not a soldier, not a spy, and not supposed to be in a combat zone. Yet she had acted in the heat of battle, saving lives on both sides. Interrogations began, Weber pressing for reasons, explanations, any hint of intelligence. Whittle refused, offering only basic answers consistent with the Geneva Convention. Her calm defiance frustrated her captors. She had survived plane crashes and gunfire without hesitation. Now mere questioning seemed trivial. As word of her actions spread among German ranks, the officers' confusion deepened. A woman had not only flown into danger, she had saved lives, maintained composure under fire, and refused to bend to intimidation. For the first time, many of them questioned their assumptions, the enemy they thought predictable, the rules they believed unbreakable. The courage they assumed was male only. Reeba Whittle was a storm they could not contain. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every rule of war, every notion of gender, and every limit of human courage. The Germans had captured her body, but her spirit remained untouchable. The Germans quickly realized they faced an unprecedented dilemma. Reeba Whittle. He was not a soldier, yet she had acted as one under fire. She was a nurse, yet she had flown into the most dangerous combat zones and treated hundreds of wounded soldiers, including German prisoners. And she was a woman in a world that had never imagined women could confront such chaos without fear. Oberleutnant Heinrich Weber and his superiors found themselves grasping for a solution, but every rule they knew seemed inadequate. They could not treat her as a standard prisoner of war. The Geneva Convention protected medical personnel, but she had been on a combat aircraft. She could not be released. She could not be housed with male POWs. Their solution was surreal. They sent her to a mental hospital in Oberursel. It was not because she was mentally ill. It was simply the only facility with separate quarters for a woman of her rank. Inside the sterile walls of the hospital, Reeba remained unshaken days blurred into weeks as interrogators arrived, questioning her about American medical procedures, the Army's evacuation logistics, and the flight nurse program. They hoped to extract military intelligence, to turn her knowledge into advantage. But Reeba gave nothing beyond what the Geneva Convention permitted. She answered calmly, directly, with the precision of a seasoned nurse and the courage of a soldier. Her captors tried fear, intimidation, and psychological pressure. "You are completely in our power," one interrogator told her. Reeba's response was characteristically sharp. "I have survived plane crashes and treated wounds you couldn't imagine. You think words frighten me?" The Germans were confronted with a reality they could neither break nor ignore. Courage did not reside in fear, and skill did not obey gender. Weeks turned into months. She endured confinement, interrogation, and the isolation of being the only American female POW in Europe. Yet she never wavered. News of her missions, of the hundreds she had saved, spread quietly among German officers, inspiring an uneasy respect. They were forced to acknowledge that here, in their care, was a woman whose competence, courage, and resilience challenged everything they had believed about war and its participants. By March 1945, the tide of war had shifted. Allied forces advanced, and the Germans, uncertain and fearful of Reeba's liberation, moved her eastward. Even as the front lines approached, Reeba's calm determination remained unbroken. She had survived the unthinkable, combat missions, plane crashes, and months of imprisonment. Her defiance was complete, her courage unshakable. In the eyes of her captors, she became a living testament to the truth that bravery knows no gender, and humanity's resolve cannot be contained. As winter gave way to spring in 1945, Reeba Whittle's world remained confined within the sterile walls of Oberhausel's mental hospital. Yet, despite the monotony and isolation, she remained unbowed. Each day brought German officers with questions, each day a reminder that she was both captive and anomaly. The war outside advanced relentlessly, but inside, time seemed suspended. She tended to the few injured patients still in the hospital, performing her duties with the same calm precision she had shown under fire. Even her captors began to notice. This woman, alone in enemy hands, possessed a composure and skill that no intimidation could erode. Oberleutnant Weber, once skeptical and puzzled, had grown both frustrated and strangely respectful. Reeba's defiance was a mirror reflecting their limitations. They tried reasoning, threats, and subtle manipulation, but she met each attempt with measured calm and unwavering logic. Every answer she gave was consistent with the Geneva Convention, yet each response was a quiet demonstration of courage, a refusal to be psychologically broken. The German officers, trained for strategy and warfare, realized that Reeba was fighting a battle of a different kind, one that could not be won through conventional means. News of the Allied advance filtered through the corridors, whispered rumors, fragmented reports, hints of approaching liberation. The Germans, faced with the inevitability of the front lines collapsing, made the decision to move her eastward. She was to be transferred, to prevent her liberation by the advancing forces. Even as she was escorted, her demeanor remained composed, resolute, and unyielding. Each step she took was a silent assertion she would not be cowed, even as the war's chaos swirled around her. In the months of captivity, Reeba reflected on the hundreds of lives she had touched. Each wounded soldier, each life saved or eased in suffering, became a shield against fear and a testament to her dedication. Her presence had already altered the perceptions of those who held her prisoner. The Germans had underestimated the resolve of one American nurse, and in doing so, they had witnessed firsthand the power of courage and competence in human form. By March 1945, the inevitability of liberation loomed. Reeba, though still a prisoner, had become a symbol of resilience. The officers around her, once confident in their authority, were left with a disquieting truth. Here was a woman whose actions had rewritten every assumption they had held about courage, skill, and duty. She had flown into danger, treated the wounded, survived a crash, and endured imprisonment with unflinching resolve. The stage was set for the final reckoning of her captivity. Allied forces advanced steadily, and the Germans could no longer maintain their hold. Yet even in this shifting chaos, Reeba's focus remained unbroken. She had survived where most would have faltered, her courage undiminished. The approaching liberation would not merely free her body. It would validate a lifetime of service, bravery, and defiance against the impossible. April 1945. The frozen landscape of eastern Germany shook with the thunder of advancing Soviet forces. Reeba Whittle, escorted eastward by a nervous German detachment, felt the first real sense of hope in months. Liberation was no longer a distant rumor. It was tangible, imminent, and undeniable. When Soviet troops finally arrived, the Germans retreated hastily, abandoning the prisoners in their care. Reeba stepped out into the uncertain spring light, exhausted, injured, and battered, yet unbroken. Freedom at last was hers. Returning to American lines, she was greeted with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. Her story, surviving a plane crash, treating over 500 wounded soldiers, and enduring months as the only female American POW in Europe, was almost beyond belief. Army officials struggled to classify her service. She had earned a Purple Heart for the wounds sustained during the crash, yet she also merited recognition for her combat missions as a flight nurse. In a precedent-setting decision, she was awarded the Air Medal, acknowledging her bravery and skill under fire, a recognition that no woman had received before. The significance of her actions extended beyond medals. German records captured after the war revealed their confusion and grudging respect. One report stated, "American utilizes female medical personnel in forward combat zones. This represents either desperate manpower shortage or radical departure from traditional melee." Terry structure. Implications unclear. The implications in truth were crystal clear. Courage and competence are not defined by gender, rank, or expectation, they are defined by action. Reeba Whittle's unyielding commitment to her duty had shattered assumptions and rewritten the rules of perception in the eyes of friend and foe alike. Her story became a symbol of resilience, skill, and humanity. She had confronted the impossible, flying where women were told they could not go, treating soldiers where most feared to tread, and surviving captivity designed to break her spirit. Each act of bravery, each refusal to bend to fear or intimidation, resonated far beyond the confines of the mental hospital where she had been imprisoned. The very men who had captured her had witnessed firsthand the extraordinary force of her will and competence. For Reeba Whittle, the impact was deeply personal. She had saved lives, upheld her oath as a nurse, and proven that bravery cannot be measured by uniform or gender. For the world, her story became a testament to the human capacity for courage, selflessness, and integrity in the darkest of circumstances. In the chaos of war, she had stood as a quiet yet indomitable force, proving that duty, compassion, and fearlessness could coexist in a single person, and that true heroism often defies expectation. By the end of her captivity, Reeba had not only survived, she had transformed the understanding of what it meant to serve, to care, and to confront danger with unwavering resolve. The war would continue around her, but her legacy, carved through courage and compassion, would endure far longer than the conflict itself. Even after liberation, the full magnitude of Reeba Whittle's heroism began to emerge. The stories of her courage in the skies and on the ground reached officers, historians, and fellow soldiers alike. She had not only faced bullets and flak, but had triaged the gravely wounded in unpressurized bouncing aircraft, saving lives under circumstances that would have crushed lesser men or women. Her actions defied not just expectations of gender, but the assumptions of the entire military hierarchy, Allied and Axis alike. For the Germans, the memory of her presence lingered uneasily. Oberleutnant Weber and other officers recorded their bewilderment in post-war reports. Here was a woman who had flown where women were forbidden, treated enemies and allies alike, survived crashes, and endured months of captivity without fear. Their training had taught them to expect compliance, terror, or helplessness. Instead, Reeba had demonstrated a moral and professional courage that no interrogation could undermine. The psychological impact of her deeds reverberated through both sides. For Allied soldiers, Reeba became a symbol, proof that courage could manifest anywhere, even in those who had been underestimated. For the Germans, her story exposed the danger of assumptions and the limits of rigid doctrine. One report succinctly captured their confusion, implications unclear. The implications, however, were profound. Competence and bravery do not follow orders. They emerge from will, skill, and moral conviction. Reeba's moral triumph was equally clear. In captivity, she had maintained her principles, adhering to the Geneva Convention while simultaneously demonstrating the highest form of battlefield courage. She had treated the wounded without prejudice, survived repeated interrogations, and preserved her dignity. The war had sought to strip her of agency, to reduce her to a pawn. She had turned it into a stage for courage, proving that heroism can exist even under the strictest control, even behind enemy lines. Her story also challenged broader societal expectations. Reeba Whittle had shown that women could serve in the most dangerous conditions with skill and composure. She had flown where doctrine said women should not, treated where men feared, and survived where most would perish. The lesson was undeniable. Valor, competence, and integrity recognized no gender, no uniform, and no hierarchy. By this point, Reeba's legacy had been cemented. She was not merely a survivor, she was a paradigm shift, a living testament to courage, resilience, and the refusal to yield under impossible circumstances. The Germans had captured her body, but her spirit had remained untouchable. Her actions left an indelible mark on history, on those who had witnessed her bravery, and on every soldier who would hear her story. After the war, Reeba Whittle returned to a world eager to honor the heroism of those who had survived, and triumphed against impossible odds. Yet her recognition was more than ceremonial. It was a validation of courage, skill, and unwavering dedication. The army struggled to categorize her service. She had been wounded in action and earned the Purple Heart, but her bravery in combat zones, treating hundreds of critically injured soldiers aboard C-47 aircraft, warranted something unprecedented. In an extraordinary acknowledgement, she was awarded the Air Medal, marking the first time a woman in military service received such an honor for frontline duty. Reeba's story spread through military and public channels, capturing imaginations and challenging perceptions. The same Germans who had once been bewildered by her presence had recorded their confusion and respect in post-war documents. They marveled at the audacity and competence of an American nurse who had confronted danger without hesitation, maintained composure under interrogation, and preserved life in circumstances designed to destroy it. The lesson they learned was unmistakable. Courage cannot be dictated, and valor is not bound by gender. For Reeba, the recognition was bittersweet. The memories of the crash, the injured soldiers, and the long months of captivity remained vivid, etched into her mind with every detail of pain, fear, and determination. But she also carried the knowledge that her actions had saved lives, inspired her fellow soldiers, and left an undeniable mark on the history of military medicine. Her story became a beacon, demonstrating that dedication and bravery could overcome the most rigid assumptions of society, the military, and even her enemies. Her legacy extended beyond medals and reports. In the post-war world, she became an emblem of the untold contributions of women in combat and medical service. Flight nurses and military medical personnel who followed her path drew courage from her example. Reeba's defiance of traditional limitations showed that heroism often manifests where it is least expected, in individuals willing to risk everything to uphold duty and humanity. Even decades later, historians would point to Reeba Whittle as a pivotal figure who had reshaped understanding of gender, bravery, and ethics in wartime. She had flown into enemy fire, defied doctrinal limitations, treated enemy and allied soldiers alike, and endured captivity with unwavering resolve. Her courage, calm under pressure, and refusal to compromise her principles had created a lasting imprint on those who witnessed her deeds, on military doctrine, and on the moral fabric of wartime heroism. Reeba Whittle had not merely survived the war, she had transcended it. She became a living testament that true courage does not wait for permission, and that integrity and skill will always leave an indelible mark on history, long after the battles have ended. Reeba Whittle's post-war recognition went beyond medals and formal honors. It became a story of inspiration for generations. Her actions had challenged deeply ingrained assumptions about women, courage, and the very nature of heroism. She had proven that battlefield valor is not a function of gender, that skill under fire is measured by competence and composure, and that moral courage can rival any weapon on the front lines. The military, historians, and the public alike began to understand the significance of her service. She had flown into enemy territory, treating wounded Americans and even German prisoners, all while exposed to the constant threat of flak, bullets, and the unforgiving elements. Her plane had crashed, her crewmates had died, yet she had survived, performing triage amidst chaos, defying expectations with every action. She had endured months of captivity in a facility not designed for her, interrogations intended to intimidate, and the isolation of being the only American female POW in Europe. And still, she had emerged unbroken. Her bravery became a benchmark for military medicine. Flight nurses who followed her example drew strength from her story, understanding that courage was not simply about surviving, it was about saving others under impossible circumstances. Her actions reshaped military policies and attitudes, illustrating that women could perform with the same courage, skill, and resilience as their male counterparts in situations previously considered too dangerous for them. The Germans who had captured her recorded their confusion and respect, noting that American female medical personnel in forward combat zones were a radical departure from tradition. Yet Reeba's deeds were unmistakable proof that competence and courage could not be contained by doctrine, assumptions, or enemy expectation. She had rewritten the rules simply by acting where it mattered most, at the point where lives hung in the balance. Beyond military and historical recognition, her story resonates on a human level. Reeba Whittle embodied selflessness, professionalism, and moral clarity. She had faced death repeatedly yet continued her mission, not for fame, not for medals, but because lives depended on her. Her courage inspired those around her, altered perceptions, and left an enduring legacy that transcends the boundaries of war. Reeba Whittle's life reminds the world that heroism is defined not by circumstance but by choice. In a war designed to measure strength and strategy, she proved that determination, skill, and courage, combined with compassion, can alter outcomes, save hundreds of lives, and challenge the expectations of friend and foe alike. She survived, she triumphed, and her story endures as a testament to what one fearless individual can achieve, even in the darkest chapters of human conflict. After the war, Reeba Whittle returned to civilian life, carrying the weight of experiences few could imagine. She had survived a plane crash, treated over 500 wounded soldiers, endured months of imprisonment, and faced interrogation with unwavering courage. Yet she remained humble, focused on the simple mission that had defined her service, saving lives. Her post-war recognition was unprecedented. She received the Purple Heart for the injuries she sustained and the Air Medal for her daring flight missions, a combination that had never before been awarded to a woman. Her story became a beacon for future generations of nurses, soldiers, and anyone striving to break barriers in the face of doubt or discrimination. She proved that competence and courage are measured not by gender or expectation, but by action under pressure. The Germans who had once held her in captivity continued to be a testament to her impact. Their post-war records reflected awe and confusion, a woman operating in combat zones, treating enemies and allies alike, and refusing to bend to fear or intimidation. Reeba Whittle had shattered assumptions and rewritten the rules of what a nurse and a soldier could accomplish. Her legacy endures. She inspired flight nurses, military medical personnel, and countless civilians who heard her story. Reeba Whittle became the embodiment of courage under fire, demonstrating that integrity, skill, and moral resolve can triumph, even in the most impossible circumstances. In the annals of World War II, she is remembered not just as the only American female POW nurse in Europe, but as a symbol of unyielding bravery. Her life proves that true heroism transcends gender, defies expectation, and leaves an indelible mark on history, forever inspiring those who dare to stand where others would flee.